So one of the major questions that arises when discussing the red pill community is, well, why do people join it? Why do so many men fall into believing these poorly formed ideas about gynocentrism and hypergamy, and insert vaguely scientific sounding dreck here? Well, I have my thoughts. In order to become someone who believes in what is, let's be real, almost sort of a cult against women, they have to have at least a few components. 1. A general sense of powerlessness, inferiority, or victimhood. 2. A predisposition towards distrusting, devaluing, or even dehumanizing women. 3. Someone to convince you that component 1 is directly related to component 2, and yes, this can be yourself. And 4. An active or passive decision to enter into a community that shares the same mentality. I want to break down what I think are the root causes of these various components, but number 4 is pretty self-explanatory. Number 3 has already been addressed in all the previous sections of this series. Instead, we're going to focus on the first 2 components and discuss why these things happen, specifically in men who make up the bulk of the red pill community and who are the center of said community. Component 1, a general sense of powerlessness, inferiority, or victimhood, comes from a few things for men. First is, generally speaking, a thing like depression and anxiety. Men experience depression and anxiety when pressured to conform to masculine norms, and also experience less likeliness to seek professional help when conforming to masculine norms. They also experience significantly worse social impairments from stronger adherence to masculine norms. Second is how that depression and anxiety is influenced by culture. Men are taught messages about being a man that make them feel inferior to the stereotypes and archetypes that men are taught to live up to. They're taught that awful things are what make a man, things like violence, emotional invulnerability, and sexual dominance over women. If they have no desire for this kind of thing, they'll likely feel inadequate or pressured, and mixed with society's lack of training men how to be introspective, they'll start to develop a sense of powerlessness and inferiority in relation to messages that seem omnipresent. Third is how men are not taught to properly foster relationships with women. Because of the wall of separation between boys and girls, boys are taught to spend time with and learn from and grow with other boys, and girls are taught to do the same with girls. Boys, as a result, grow up to become men in a way that their understanding of what it means to be a man and to be with a woman is learned from other men and boys a lot of the time, which makes it more difficult to empathize with and understand women who are seen as being inherently different, even as we really aren't. This leads into component 2, a predisposition towards distrusting, devaluing, and dehumanizing women. This is not something all men do, and it's not something that I'm saying is a direct result of the wall of separation, but the wall of separation is a starting point towards this. Because men often get their messages about women from media and from other men, the othering effect makes it harder to see women fully as human beings and instead as an abstraction. The abstraction of women through the male gaze is one in which women are an object of utility, of purpose to be used, where our bodies and our emotional labor are in a way the sum total of what we are. Of course, women are much more complicated than that. We're full human beings capable of much more than just serving men, but media can help create the illusion that we really do think of ourselves as launch pads for male excellence or sex objects for male excitement. Following that, the wall of separation mixes with media to create a situation in which men have an easier time empathizing with men than with women, and see women more in terms of usefulness rather than innate human value. This, mixed with things like depression and feelings of inferiority, will lead to disappointment when women don't turn out to be like the way that men have made them out to be for basically our entire lives, which will lead to, in my speculation, men growing to distrust and devalue women and prefer other men for bonding. From here, the red pill community becomes a direct pipeline from the depression caused by being oblivious to the misogynistic overtones of society to replicating that misogyny at an exaggerated degree. Red pill communities try to take those feelings of depression and misogyny and justify them through the lens of the male gaze and toxic masculinity, when really it's the male gaze and toxic masculinity that create those feelings of depression and misogyny. It's again an example of aggrieved entitlement. These men feel emasculated by a society that is increasingly egalitarian and social justice friendly, and they're taught to blame that emasculation on women and people of color rather than on the people, mostly rich white men, in power who actually disempower them. The reason why the red pill community is so effective at turning a depressed guy into a red pillar is because they play exactly into the sympathies that are trained into men by patriarchy and twist that around so that they're constantly in a loop in which the enemy is always the thing that could actually help them, which is feminism. Men are taught to value facts, logic, and reasoning over intuition and emotion. Men are taught to avoid soul-searching or admitting vulnerability or to be okay with being wrong. Men are taught to exercise dominance and control over any situation. Men are taught that they need women, but they need to satiate this need entirely on their terms and not on equal terms with women. Men are taught not to listen to women or to learn from women, or that women are even capable of being on equal terms with men to begin with. Men are taught to view being lesser as being broken. What the red pill community does is teaches all of these same things, but argues that the side effects of depression, misery, and loneliness that result are caused by women and feminists who are specifically trying to make men feel worse, thus creating a closed circle in which there is no way out, no way of actually personally improving, and thus they're stuck feeling that way forever and perpetually blaming women and social justice advocates. They use things like pseudoscience, which plays into the valuing of facts and logic over intuition and emotion, to reinforce the wall of separation between men and women, such that one red pillar even argued that women are not human beings like men are. They appeal to what men want and what men are taught to want, and they create the illusion of betterment within a toxic masculinity feedback loop. But when that illusion doesn't lead to actual results, they have a scapegoat to make leaving that feedback loop seem like a worse option. In any sense of the word, they are conspiracy theorists. But in some sense of the word, they might even be a cult. And there's one other thing worth discussing. The red pill is a pipeline to Nazism. I hate to say something so drastic because I like to be as reasonable as I can. I like to not evoke such an extreme thing as Nazis in just any conversation. So when I say this knowing full well how extreme it may sound. But it's actually not that extreme of a leap. You see, the 4 tenets of red pill ideology that I outlined in a previous section of this video, they intersect greatly with Nazi ideology, unfortunately. Nazi ideology, when really boiled down, was the culmination of white supremacy, anti-Semitism, authoritarianism, and eugenics into a somewhat incoherent ideology that valued a strong, dominant presence that could crush any threats to its dominance, and would protect you as long as you fit under the demographic that it defined as the superior group. The superior group was, of course, white people, and the inferior groups were people of color, Jewish people, people with disabilities, and so on. Eugenics was a pseudoscientific way of verifying the superiority that they touted as being inherent and biologically based. Anti-Semitism provided a clear scapegoat to continuously feed into the culture of extreme dominance and power through strength. Authoritarianism made it difficult to question systemic decisions, and white supremacy gave white people the motivation to continue to believe that all of these things would benefit them. This intersects largely with what red pillars are doing. Red pillars scapegoat feminists and women to continuously feed into the idea of men being superior. They use biotruths and evolutionary psychology as a pseudoscientific way of verifying the superiority that men have over women, and they use cult-like rhetoric to make it difficult to question community decisions. They use the idea of male empowerment to give them the motivation to continue to believe that all of this will benefit them. There is already going to be some overlap, but for those who don't see eye to eye with Nazism, Nazi recruiters can take all of these things and shift gears. It can start with women as scapegoats, but it can be changed to people of color as scapegoats, social justice advocates as scapegoats, and of course, Jewish people as scapegoats. If you're already inclined to believe in a conspiracy theory in which feminists control the world, it's not much of a stretch to believe that Jewish people are doing the same thing. If you're already inclined to believe that biological truths make men inherently superior to women, then it's not much of a stretch to believe that this makes you inherently superior to people of color or Jewish people too. If you're already inclined to believe that to be alpha male is to be the best one can be, then it's not much of a stretch to believe that to be Aryan is to be the best one can be. It's not so much the specifics as much as it is the mechanisms of thought that red pillars perpetuate that become a pipeline to Nazism. This is why Nazis parrot the same rhetoric in a lot of ways, emphasis on alpha males and beta males, or emphasis on feminists as some conspiratorial group. Now, bear in mind, I'm not saying that the red pill are a conspiracy. I'm saying they believe in a conspiracy. Red pill as a community is really nothing more than people with an axe to grind, developing an internal ideology to grind that axe as strongly as they can. And I don't know how much the people coming up with these claims believe them, and I really don't think that matters as much. What matters is that the people who learn these ideas and parrot them uncritically believe them, and that makes someone really susceptible to increasingly paranoid beliefs. The increasing paranoia is easy for Nazis to take advantage of. They've been on record attempting to recruit both gamers and furries by trying to foster that same paranoia and sense of insecurity that the red pill community fosters best. Essentially, the red pill functions excellently as a transition from lonely guy who's upset at the world to full-blown Nazi, by fostering the things that harm that lonely guy while giving him the illusion of a sense of community to help him work through those feelings. It's something that I don't know much about what can be said, so I'm gonna let some of the data speak for itself. Now we're going to take a rather dark dive into a very painful subject matter. We're going to talk about mass killings. Recent articles have been tying together various mass killings as being part of a new group of alt-right killers, including killers like Dylan Roof and Elliot Rodger, among others. I'd like to take a moment to discuss Elliot Rodger. Before Elliot Rodger acted out his killings, he wrote a 100,000-word manifesto detailing his life and his reasoning for killing. For the record, that's almost as long as a Lord of the Rings book. In his manifesto, he outlined misogynistic motivations over and over again. The first paragraph of the manifesto reads like this: Humanity. All of my suffering on this world has been at the hands of humanity, particularly women. It has made me realize just how brutal and twisted humanity is as a species. All I ever wanted was to fit in and live a happy life amongst humanity, but I was cast out and rejected, forced to endure an existence of loneliness and insignificance, all because the females of the human species were incapable of seeing the value in me. See how he specifically places the blame on women and talks in a way mimicking the Evo-psych arguments like some of those we addressed earlier in this series, referring to women as females of the human species. Throughout the manifesto, he repeatedly mentions looking up to men who could get laid, and he seems to show an obsession with sexuality that's altogether unhealthy. Here's an excerpt. I was completely and utterly alone. No one knew me or extended a hand to help me. I was an innocent, scared little boy trapped in a jungle full of malicious predators, and I was shown no mercy. Some boys randomly pushed me against the lockers as they walked past me in the hall. One boy who was tall and had blonde hair called me a loser, right in front of his girlfriends. Yes, he had girls with him. Pretty girls, and they didn't seem to mind that he was such an evil bastard. In fact, I bet they liked him for it. This is how girls are, and I was starting to realize it. This was what truly opened my eyes to how brutal the world is. The most meanest and depraved of men come out on top, and women flock to these men. Their evil acts are rewarded by women, while the good, decent men are laughed at. It is sick, twisted, and wrong in every way. I hated the girls even more than the boys because of this. The sheer cruelty of the world around me was so intense that I will never recover from the mental scars. Any experience I ever had before never traumatized me as much as this. Notice how a more simple answer isn't in view because of his fixation on women's role in making him miserable. He doesn't realize that, rather than being symptomatic of some sort of inherent nature to women, this is just a consequence of high school social dynamics being altogether terrible. Yeah, some girls go for assholes, but this isn't the reflection of an inherent nature to women. The idea of an inherent nature to women is not something we're all born believing. It's learned from places like the Red Pill community, which Elliot took part in, via websites like PUAHate.com. Elliot Rodger's story shows an example of the extreme othering that results from believing women to be manipulators, believing biology and evolution to create essential differences between men and women, and believing that men are oppressed by feminism and the like. Here's another example. I concluded that women are flawed. There is something mentally wrong with the way that their brains are wired, as if they haven't evolved from animal-like thinking. They are incapable of reason or thinking rationally. They are like animals, completely controlled by their primal, depraved emotions and impulses. That is why they're attracted to barbaric, wild, beast-like men. They're beasts themselves. Beasts should not be able to have any rights in a civilized society. If their wickedness is not contained, the whole of humanity will be held back from advancement to a more civilized state. Women should not have the right to choose who to mate with. That choice should be made for them by civilized men of intelligence. If women had the freedom to choose which men to mate with like they do today, they would breed with stupid, degenerate men, which would only produce stupid, degenerate offspring. This in turn would hinder the advancement of humanity. Not only hinder it, but devolve humanity completely. Women are like a plague that must be quarantined. When I came to this brilliant, perfect revelation, I felt like everything was now clear to me, in a bitter, twisted way. I am one of the few people in this world who has the intelligence to see this. I am like a god, and my purpose is to exact ultimate retribution on all of the impurities I see in the world. What scares me about passages like this is that he mirrors the exact language used by all of the previous Red Pill people I've examined in previous videos. He's mirroring both Red Pill and Nazi ideology, the idea of a sort of biologically motivated authoritarianism towards women, and hatred for quote-unquote degenerate offspring. His conclusions have since been shared by Jordan Peterson and Ross Douthat in the wake of the incel murderer in Toronto. I won't discuss the incel murderer or the incel community too much because that would take up a whole separate video, but I will say that the incel community is not horribly distinct from the Red Pill community in terms of rhetoric or behaviors. I wrote the original draft of this script for the Red Pill series before the Toronto killing had even taken place, and when I saw that it had happened, I was disturbed to see my hypothesis reflected in real time through such violent means. There are several articles tying Elliot Rodger to the alt-right and to the Red Pill community, and while I agree with some of their claims, what it boils down to is that Elliot Rodger mirrors their rhetoric regardless of any interactions with them. Rhetoric isn't formed independently, it's fostered through community. The Red Pill community speeds up the process through which men turn to the mentality that Elliot Rodger puts forth by encouraging the line of thinking that Elliot Rodger showcases in his manifesto. It's not so much a question of whether or not the Red Pill community created Elliot Rodger, but an emphatic statement that the Red Pill community spreads what Elliot Rodger believed in that was the foundation of his attempts at retribution. The Southern Poverty Law Center wrote an article discussing the connection between mass shooters and the alt-right and explained ties between mass shootings and identity crises. Alt-right propaganda is intentionally designed to foster feelings of grievance, injustice, and animosity, particularly against those considered threats to Western civilization, otherwise known as people of color, immigrants, and other marginalized communities. The alt-right is giving a growing population of aggrieved young white men a worldview that experts find is ripe for violence. The externalization of blame for one's own disappointing circumstances in life, and particularly its offloading into minority communities, is one of several indicators of mass violence. The Southern Poverty Law Center cites an article on mass shootings called Triple Entitlement and Homicidal Anger, an exploration of the intersectional identities of American mass murderers. And the article says the following about Tim Wise's arguments on race. Of particular relevance to the study of race and mass murder is Wise's description of a potentially problematic aspect of white entitlement and expectation. He characterizes the American dream of always expecting to perpetually and seamlessly move onward and upward as a particularly white cultural phenomenon in America. Wise illuminates the significant idea that being the dominant group can set you up for a fall, can prevent you from building up the kinds of coping skills needed to deal with setback, because so often these skills are ones that you just don't need. White men are not systematically disenfranchised, and so they have not built up the requisite psychological and emotional mechanisms for dealing with loss. Wise goes on to assert that whites experience a serious feeling of emptiness as a result of their own lost ethnicity, particularly when faced with the multiculturalism of others. Furthermore, the author of the article, Eric Madfis, says the following. The externalization of blame has been cited as a predisposing psychological trait of mass murderers. Interestingly enough, from McKinney's analysis, it seems that the externalization of blame, at least in the sense of always perceiving oneself as a victim and never as the culprit, may be a widely prevalent rationalization and commonplace in mainstream white society. When mass killers also exhibit this symptom, it may be an artifact of their racial upbringing and situation in the American hierarchical structure. When entitled white males encounter this newfound indeterminate future where they are no longer assured status and success through privilege, some may blame everyone and everything but themselves. Their sense of white male privilege does not permit them to acknowledge their own role in any mistakes, let alone any personal limitations. Accordingly, major life stresses or acute losses, such as getting fired or divorced, prove particularly unbearable for white males who have already lived lives replete with shame and disappointment, as is the case with the vast majority of mass murderers. He further goes on to connect mass shootings with masculinity. By one last catastrophic show of force, entitled but continually emasculated men feel homicidal violence on a massive scale will regain lost feelings of masculinity, superiority, and power. The life histories of mass murderers are replete with a variety of frustrations, rejections, and disappointments. They have often been failures in work, in love, and in many other interpersonal interactions, and this has a devastating effect on their masculine sense of pride, and often their white sense of entitlement. Accordingly, they respond to this emasculation in the socially approved manner from men with violence. Gilligan even notes how the total loss of honor, prestige, respect, and status may amount to the disintegration of identity, especially their adult, masculine, heterosexual identity. Further, Gilligan states that the basic psychological motive or cause of violent behavior is the myth to ward off or eliminate the feeling of shame and humiliation, and replace it with its opposite, the feeling of pride. Though many mass killers experience gender challenges as a result of downward mobility, subordinated masculinity, and/or other personal life failures such as divorce, this shame and humiliation may be replaced with a gender performance. And as violence is synonymous with masculinity in American culture, the mass killer perceives that the more violent his actions, the more manly and respected he will be. For entitled white men who long to feel the masculine pleasures of power, strength, and domination, a massacre can be a show of force, even if it is a life-ending one, which serves to bring the killer back or forge anew a masculine identity full of pride, accomplishment, and even international fame. While I won't go into detail on other articles detailing similar points, I have previously cited Gender, Class, and Terrorism by Michael Kimmel, and I will also mention an article titled Mass Shootings and Masculinity by Tristan Bridges and Leigh Tober as another article that goes into similar discussions of the tie between mass shootings and reclaiming a perceived loss of masculinity. So this may all feel tangential, but it really isn't. The point I'm trying to make is that in the most severe cases, there is an intersection of white privilege and heterosexual male entitlement in play when it comes to acts of violence. Specifically, white men feel emasculated by society, and this manifests in things such as feeling inadequate in relationships and love, or feeling inadequate at their job or in school. Mixed with depression and cultural messages about what it means to be a man, these men and sometimes even boys will learn to regain their masculinity through targeting those who they can assert power over and acting that out. With an assault rifle, anyone can feel more powerful than another person. But it's worth noting that in cases like Dylan Roof and Elliot Rodger, the targeting is in a very specifically racist and misogynistic direction. The alt-right helps to foster the white entitlement and paranoia that leads to the kinds of things we saw Dylan Roof claim in his manifesto, and the red pill community helps to foster the male entitlement and paranoia that leads to the kinds of statements we saw in Elliot's manifesto. Mass shooters mimic all of the traits of the red pill individual: a fear of being emasculated, a sense of inferiority, mixed with an attempt to reclaim that through appeals to a sort of paranoid hatred of those who are pointed to and falsely blamed. The reason I quoted so many of these statements is because they showcase the pipeline between feelings of inadequacy and a growing sense of hatred out of a perceived victimhood status, the same exact pipeline that the red pill community creates. Southern Poverty Law Center continues. The grievances collected by those motivated by the white nationalist ideology at the heart of the alt-right often do not begin with racist propaganda, but rather in the toxic communities of the men's rights movement. While driven by distinct ideologies, the style of grievances nursed by the men's rights and white nationalist communities are similarly constructed around a privileged group threatened by the visible social mobility of those that were formerly oppressed, women and minorities respectively. The continued rise of social media has only inflamed this tension. Neo-fascists treat these men's rights websites as recruitment grounds. They find angry, frustrated young men and groom them in their own image, Abby Wilkinson observed in The Guardian soon after the 2016 presidential election. The community seems to be largely white, and that's evident because race comes up a lot, sometimes in the form of a kind of racial pseudoscience that advocates use to explain the dynamics of heterosexual relationships. The age-old racist argument that black men are taking our women is made regularly. Racist slurs are chucked around casually. There seems to be a significant overlap with organized white supremacy. Now, how much does the red pill community and the alt-right community overlap? I can't say with any certainty, because there's no concrete statistical data on the matter. What I can say is that their rhetoric has a lot of overlap. Even in articles I read from Red Pillars, sections that I didn't include incorporated a lot of racist rhetoric about white supremacy, and we can see a direct connection between the white supremacist rhetoric and the masculine entitlement rhetoric via the demographics and stated purposes of mass shooters, such that we know that one can lead into the other and that the two often exist in tandem. Ultimately, what matters is not whether or not the red pill community intends to recruit people to Nazism. What matters is that Nazis emphatically are intending to recruit people to Nazism using the same anti-feminist, bio-truth, entitlement rhetoric that we see from red pillars all the time, and that, as such, if the red pill community invites someone into their group, they inadvertently create a pipeline directly to Nazi recruiters who prey on the sympathies of men who feel emasculated by society. I'm not one for slippery slope arguments, and I recognize that someone could feel anti-feminist leanings without becoming anywhere near as bad as a Nazi. I also recognize that someone could wholly believe in red pill ideas and still not be a Nazi, and might eventually just grow out of those ideas, or just sort of put them to the side as life circumstances take priority. I want to recognize people's humanity even as I worry about where that can head, and so in that sense I want to make it clear that I don't think all or even most red pill people are Nazis or will turn into Nazis. I don't actually have enough data on that to even say anything on the matter. What I do think is that the ideology is, on its own, very dangerous because it encourages a lack of empathy, a lack of community with women and even between men, and a lack of self-improvement. It pushes people towards misogyny and away from feminism, which historically has been trying to help them. It pushes people towards beliefs that are self-destructive, intellectually dishonest, and incoherent. It makes men more vulnerable, which encourages them to be more extreme in their reactionary beliefs. And given all of that, the community helps push enough people towards dehumanizing, hateful, misogynistic, racist beliefs that it's a problem regardless of how big the percentage is of them actually turning towards violence or Nazism. The violence, the pipeline to Nazism, these things are cultural problems within their community, and their ideology validates these things whether it means to or not, which means the ideology, the community, and the people who make up that community are deeply, deeply compromised.